Hello and welcome to another episode of How Are You Holding Up, a mental health podcast by the depressed, for the depressed. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lindsey.
And Lindsey.
Yes.
I'd like to ask you, how are you holding up?
I'm okay.
Yeah?
I am extremely busy with many, many things.
Nice.
And so I have started a very long to-do list on my notes on my phone because and I'm in sections as well because I keep feeling like I'm forgetting all these little things. And then you know what I do? I disassociate and I read. And I just stop doing anything. How about you, Chris? How are you holding up? How's it going with the meds?
1 week down. I feel better? ? I don't know. It's still a little early to tell. I feel like the euphoria of the first few days of that whole living on, I'm doing good things for myself. Look at me. Wee. It kind of wore off towards the end of the week. But as far as my focus and my energy levels, I do feel like they're still a little sharper. Not positive if it's through habit or through the meds or whatever it is. But I guess we'll continue to find out. Stay tuned.
So today we really want to talk about something that I think doesn't get discussed enough and something that I wish I would have known about sooner. And it's the lesser discussed symptoms of depression.
Yes.
And some of these are things that only in the last couple years they're starting to also look for, doctors are looking for in their patients.
A lot of trying to recognize in terms of like what... lost my train of thought. Got distracted by dog.
Yeah, so, there's a no size fits all sort of thing. I think there's something that, whenever you watch those depression, like, oh, take these pills, it's always, have you lost your ability to enjoy normal things? Do you feel down and hopeless? Have your sleeping patterns changed? And so that's kind of this figure in your mind. You start thinking of someone who's really apathetic and kind of sleepy and unhappy and sad. And I think it can make you feel like, especially if that's not really exactly how you experience depression, maybe like you're not the norm. And I think we all experience internally and kind of our mental processes similarly with depression, but we will outwards express them differently.
Yes.
Yes. That was not very concise or graceful. My leg is super itchy, and that was all I could think about. Okay.
Itchiness, by the way, not one of the symptoms.
Not a symptom.
Though we are going to start with one that's kind of a weird outlier. It's one that we'd only ever heard about, like, really recently.
Yeah, and I think a particularly loved actor that we all know put it out there.
Excessive smiling, also known as smiling depression.
Yeah, that's a real thing. Look it up.
Yep. So this is quite literally the external version of the big ol', kind of meme-ish image of somebody wearing a smiley face mask while they are crying behind it. It's that idea that in order to show off their feelings, they choose only to show smiling. They only choose to show happiness.
Robin Williams is a really
perfect example.
That's the actor I was talking about.
You don't typically see people exhibit this kind of depression unless it is so in their nature. It is something that I myself have also been guilty of on occasion when I was younger.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty atypical.
Yeah, it is definitely not a standard form of depression. We could honestly, if we had enough time to do the research on it, we could do a whole episode on just that by itself. But
yeah, and it's not to say that your depression is different. You're still. So one of the things I think we all experience is we blame ourselves for a lot of things.
Yeah.
So let's say you're all on a sport team and your team loses. And instead of being like, wow, our team just didn't play as well today, But better luck next time. If you have depression, you're more likely to be like, God, I'm the worst. I'm such a fucking failure. I should have trained more. Everyone said that I sucked, and I do suck. I'm just and you really lay a lot of blame with yourself. And that's something I think a lot of people experience, but how they outwardly, so then this moves us on to like a workaholic. So some people get, I know we're skipping around a little bit, but they get obsessively taken over by working.
Sup?
Also an atypical behavior.
Yeah, it's fun when you come to realize that you're filling the time that you would spend being depressed with time that you could spend being exhausted instead, mentally, physically, whatever possibility. And then given the choice between taking time to spend with yourself and calm down and relax, no, I've got to keep working because that's how I keep the demons quiet.
I think it'd be interesting if they did a study on introverts versus extroverts and how they experience it, and if it's more of a male extrovert thing to be a smiling, depressive, workaholic versus an internal, more introverted person.
It's possible. I don't. It's one of those things where you're not going to know.
It's still figuring it out. And one that I found really interesting and inspiring, we got a message from one of our listeners, and they asked us to do an episode on anger and rage specifically. And I started really researching it, and it started talking about how mostly males, but not necessarily, but they experience depression with a lot of anger. And I know I've dealt with a lot of irritability, and it kind of comes hand in hand. And that's not necessarily what you would imagine when you think of someone who's depressed.
Yeah, it comes with that whole being on your last nerve aspect of depression.
Yeah.
Where every little thing, it doesn't matter how insignificant, it can ruin your day instantly.
And I know that I've been told by family members, I just feel like I have to walk on eggshells with you because you'll just snap. And I mean, it sucks that's the way I've portrayed myself, because I feel like I'm being really generously patient with people in my life and very loving and very giving. And then I guess from people who don't experience depression, I'm seen as really kind of withdrawn and testy and overly emotional and irritable.
I know that I am absolutely irritable a lot of the time, but when I'm in a more public setting, or if I'm, in my work hours, I hide that as much as humanly possible, because that is something that will get you fired, for one, and two, I don't want to be that guy.
Well, that's why I think you're more prone to being overly cheerful and the whole smiling.
Mm-hmm. But when I'm finally like settling down for the evening, or if I'm in a place where all I want to do is be by myself and be alone and not be bothered, I will absolutely snap on whoever interrupts that.
Yeah.
It is almost guaranteed, unless it's a certain set of circumstances, just because I went years without having really any me time. So now I treasure it and I hoard it.
Yeah. And I think that's where, so some of the, what happens then if you're angry and you're irritable and you don't understand why, and then you get a lot of people like talking to you, people who you love and who love you, and they're like, you're just hard to be around, and I don't understand why you're so angry with me all the time. I'm just trying to talk to you. I'm just trying to understand what's going on with you. You start experiencing guilt. Enormous amounts of guilt. So much guilt. Guilt for everything. Guilt for upsetting your family. Guilt for not finishing that project. Guilt for not doing better.
Guilt for not taking the steps that you said you were going to take a week ago, a month ago, a year ago.
Guilt for not messaging back that person who messaged you on Facebook and you totally meant to, and you read the message and you just didn't get back to them because you didn't have the spoons because you were busy.
Mm-hmm. Guilt is a rough thing. We've done an episode already on it. So if you want a little more on that fun aspect of depression, trust me, we've got it all covered.
But that's not something, I think, if you go into a psychologist and you're like, yeah, I experience just a lot of guilt all the time, they're going to be like, yeah, you're depressed.
Yeah, no, that's never going to be like the end-all be-all diagnosis. You could just be Catholic. You never know. Like, it comes from a place of just, you understand that sometimes you're responsible for all the bad that's going on in the world, and you're like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not actually responsible for all this. You can't tell yourself that, though, because then you feel guilty for lifting yourself up when you should feel like shit.
You know, I went through a really bad time of feeling guilty all the time about so many things. I felt like I was drowning. And I remember, I think it was my sister I was talking to, and she said, really, guilt is a completely useless thing to be experiencing. Like, if you want to feel something and you want to change, that's fine, but don't like hoard the guilt. Don't, if you feel bad that you didn't do something, or you're like, oh man, I hurt this person's feelings, that sucks, don't feel guilty. Do something to fix it, but don't just sit and ruminate. By the way, rumination is something that almost all depressives do, is we ruminate too much.
So
yeah, no, everybody does that. That's just one of those across the board.
Yeah.
So instead of ruminating and thinking about it and feeling guilty and feeling bad, do something or forgive yourself.
Yeah.
Either way, you should forgive.
Ideally, yeah, do both.
Yeah, you should. I mean, you should, but it. And I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but basically, yeah, guilt is a very almost unnecessary emotion. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, you can feel guilty if you do something that hurts someone, or if it's something where it's just like, I feel bad about that, but that is all it should be.
Yeah.
Is you should feel bad and then move on.
Right, or you should fix it. I think it's the guilt is kind of the emotion after that. It's what you when you've been sitting on it.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. We're not professionals.
One of the other things that comes with depression is we've kind of grouped these all together, because I also feel like, I think we both feel that these are hand in hand some of the worst parts of when you're in that depressive fog is the memory loss, the concentration loss, and the indecisiveness.
I really was confused for a long time by how bad my memory was and how bad my concentration was. I thought for a while, and I still might have ADD or some sort of ADHD. I thought maybe something really traumatic happened, which, by the way, if you have really bad blank spots years, you might have had a big trauma and your brain had to protect yourself. So that's something to look into.
Yes.
But yeah, when I finally started realizing that a lot of it was due to my depression, it was kind of a relief.
It's, I noticed it primarily when I started getting into my late 20s, was when my memory was just starting to just go, no, there's no good memories that I've got right now. I'm only going to remember the bad things. Or, somebody has to talk to me 3 or 4 times in a row because I'm too busy having a 1,000-yard stare.
Yeah, the whole concentration, for me, sometimes it's like, I think that might go with disassociating. So you just aren't able to stay in your body in the moment with the person. And it really sucks. That gets tied in with guilt.
You've all heard us get to those points in this very podcast.
That's true.
We are more than capable of having that indecisiveness, that concentration just go out the window. We will fumble on our words and immediately just go, hold on, don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and then the indecisiveness is something that I haven't had to suffer too much from, because I think I get so at the end of my rope I just make a decision. But I've seen a lot of friends where they're the ones I think also who experience more anxiety when they just can't decide certain things. Let's say we're in a store and they're trying to figure out what to choose, and it's so overwhelming and there's just so much going on and they can't figure it out and they start having a panic attack. So, and that goes with the concentration loss, the memory loss of, wait, why did I come in here to this lane? And so something that I did to help myself with that kind of thing, once I realized I had these issues, was I started writing a lot more lists for myself. And I don't journal as much as I should, but I did start trying to do like daily journals of what happened that day, so I don't lose months and months of my life,
It's probably a good
or my
idea.
year, like I can, if you ask me what I did yesterday, it would take me a hot minute to really remember. I have some severe memory issues.
Yeah, no, I literally, I was joking the other day with my coworkers saying, hey, you know what's kind of funny? I can remember friggin' Scruff McGruff's address from a commercial from the early 90s, but I couldn't tell you what I did last week.
Yeah.
If you asked me, hey, what's Scruff McGruff's address? Scruff McGruff, Chicago, Illinois, 61652. And I don't know why that is in my head, as well as the address for Stick Stickley from Nickelodeon. These are things that my brain decided to remember instead of my day-to-day, which leads us to another change in behavior. Your change in your sense of humor.
Yes. And I think when I'm not going through depression, which I'm not really going through right now, I think I'm a lot more positive. My jokes are a little bit more lighthearted.
Mm-hmm.
I can get sillier about things.
Sure.
And then and you can go back into the podcast when we're both really depressed and hear how dark our sense of humor can get.
I've almost always, as far back as I can think of, I've always had a darker sense of humor. But when I am in my deepest depression, there is no limit to how dark I will go. I will not actually stop myself.
I think it can be a little much for people who aren't going through what you're going through, because you feel like you're going through an emotional war zone. You're angry and irritable. You're tired. You're having memory loss. You're trying to make sure everyone's still happy and people are used to you being at a certain level of energy and ability, and you just don't have that. And so suddenly things that just are not supposed to socially be very funny are hilarious.
Yeah, because you hit a point where gallows humor is so fundamentally important. And I mean, it is important for people who are going through...
mechanism.
It absolutely is. It's for people who are going through the darkest of times. It is where the phrase gallows humor comes from, is literally you see people getting executed day in, day out. It leads you to a place where you can't see the light of day.
So if you're somebody who's not going through depression right now and you're seeing your partner making jokes that you find kind of inappropriate or stingy and harsh, it might be because they're going through depression. And that's the only way that they're coping with it right then.
It is sometimes so impossible to see. Ironically enough, it's impossible to smile sometimes, so all you can do is laugh.
Yes, that's an interesting way of putting it.
Which kind of leads us, speaking of smiling and all of that, physical standpoint, there are also physical symptoms of depression that are not talked about as much. Things such as aches, pains, cramps, digestive problems, neck and back pain, things like that. It's a lot of stuff that can be attributed to
other stuff.
Other things, like, especially if you're...
I sit in a desk all day, you know.
I sit in a desk all day. I have a bad bed. I've got any number of things. I've got bad shoes.
Yeah.
Any number of
things.
things.
And it could be those things as well. So, of course, you should stretch and try to exercise and have a good bed. But if there just seems to be, for whatever reason, you get these headaches or you become very light sensitive or your skin gets really sensitive and nobody can figure out what's wrong with you, part of it might be the fact that you have depression. And I think it's interesting that they're starting to make these connections where psychologically we're dealing with so much stress and anxiety and unhappiness. It's like a poison, and it starts to show up in physical symptoms.
I mean, ultimately, there are psychosomatic reactions. Again, we're not doctors, but these are things that can occur in the human body.
And the biggest thing that they talk about, I think, on commercials and when you go to a doctor, you're filling out a form, is weight gain or loss.
Yeah.
A very quick amount, large amount over a short period of time. So obviously there's some physical stuff that's going on, and now they're just starting to figure out, it's all this other stuff. And one that can really fuck up a relationship is low sex drive.
Yeah. It's one that kind of sneaks up on you because,
Life happens.
Life happens. You're tired. You're coming home from work. The last thing on your mind is getting some hanky-panky on. But
Hanky-panky.
Yeah, I'm going with hanky. Okay.
That's fair. No, that's good. Let's keep it that way.
Oh,
keep going.
Darn, I was going to say get some fuck on. But all right, let's...
So, hanky-panky.
Hanky-panky. So... the last thing on your mind is, ironically enough, something good and healthy and pleasurable.
Yeah, look, when you're stressed and you're tired and you're upset and you're irritable and you're just so tired and you're guilty, those are not sexy feelings. So,
no.
And actually that can help you reconnect with your partner and have good emotions flooding you. Just like exercising and eating well can pep you up a little bit. Having sex could pep you up a little bit.
Yes.
So we should be doing more of those things, but here we are groveling in our unhappiness.
Yeah.
And it's, fucking chemicals and life events and hormones, man.
There's a lot that can go wrong. I mean, one of the first things that a doctor should do as soon as you mention, especially things like weight gain, loss, anything like that, first thing that your doctor should probably do, check your thyroid.
Yep.
Almost always, a good doctor will go, okay, you've gained this much weight in this amount of time, we gotta check your thyroid. Because if there's something going on there, who knows? That also interferes with giving you depression-like symptoms.
Yes. So here's the thing, is a lot of what we've been mentioning can be a part of, like we said, of something else. If you have a lot of cramps and you have a lot of digestion problems and you're a woman, you could have endometriosis. If you're having, just you're aching and you're tired all the time and your sense of humor is kind of going RE, you might just have a bad mattress and you're just not sleeping enough, and just being sleep deprived can make you grumpy and a little bit more humorless. So that's why I think these aren't discussed quite as much. But the great thing is, if you already know you have depression and you are experiencing these, but you didn't realize these could be it, there's things you can do to kind of help. And like we said, talking about the journaling, just being like, wow, I am working way too much. I will maybe kind of cut back on that. Didn't realize that could be part of the depression.
Recognizing that there are, various things that we will do to distract ourselves. And most of them are, let's face it, self-destructive.
Yeah. And I think I feel sometimes so out of control of myself with the emotions that I deal with and the depression and the anxiety. Having an ounce of control over how I process it and how I deal with it, that can mean a huge difference for me. Makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Sorry if I'm talking weird. That's another thing we didn't talk about. Your speech can get kind of funky when you're going through...
I feel like we've mentioned it in an episode before, but it is definitely something that...
So I think I might be headed, just really getting real close to depression, because I'm about to have several life changes within a couple weeks. But we'll see. Maybe I'll be okay.
Fingers crossed.
Yay, fingers crossed.
Thank you all for listening. This may have been a little bit more of a wild ride kind of episode. I think we were both in that same headspace right now of just shit's wild, man.
Yeah, but I think it was good. It was educational.
Yes.
I hope.
I always hope. But as for us, follow us on Instagram at HAYHU Podcast, like our Facebook page, subscribe to the subreddit, and if you want to support us directly, visit our Patreon. Or if you want, you can send us something directly and email us at mailbag@howareyoholdingup.com. Thank
you so much for the listen. And I hope that some of this was helpful and inspiring. And as always,
don't tell us to just get over it.